Hello, welcome to Chapter 19 for Business Math called Financial Management. This is Lesson 19.2, Issuing Stocks and Bonds. As always, I always start my videos off with telling you, make sure you're reading through the chapter. Don't just jump over to these worksheets and hope that they have everything that you need to understand what you're doing. Read the chapter, look at the examples, pay attention to not just how do I get through this problem, but what am I doing? Why am I doing it? The more you understand about what you're doing, the better you'll be able to get through these problems and apply it as we go through the chapter. So just make sure, don't just jump straight over these worksheets. It's going to be confusing if you do that. All right, so when your company issues stocks and bonds, you must pay certain expenses. The amount your business actually receives from the sale after paying these expenses is the net proceeds. The prospectus will indicate the underwriting expenses as costs per share. So the value of the issue equals price per share times number of shares. So this is definitely, we're talking about stocks and bonds here. We're getting into the stock market just a little bit. So we have a price per share, that's how much we're buying it for, and how many shares are we actually buying. So that's called the value of the issue. So how many were issued and the value of that. Underwriting commission, so that equals the value of the issue. We need to know that first, times the percent of the underwriting commission. So there's a certain commission that they get to charge for doing this. Net proceeds, that's going to equal the value of the issue. Again, we need to know that already, minus the total selling expenses. Again, they'll most likely give us some selling expenses or give us the kind of amount that it's going to cost. So like in this table below, I can already see they give us commission that we have to calculate, and then other expenses, they're just telling us it's other expenses. They're not indicating what they are. And then the cost per share of underwriting expenses. So that equals the total selling expenses divided by the total number of shares. So this just tells us, how much did it cost us to buy this? It has to do with kind of the I was going to say common sense of it, but it's not really necessarily common sense, but you don't necessarily want this number to be too terribly big because you want it to be a small cost per share, or at least equatable to the net proceeds. So it's kind of a difficult one to compare there just out of context, but it definitely helps us know about whether or not it's a good buy or not. All right, so let's go ahead and look at the first table here. So we have the value of the issue. They tell us that. We don't have to calculate it necessarily, but in future problems, we're probably going to have to calculate this one. They're not just going to hand it to us. So if they don't tell you the value of the issue, they might tell you how much it was per share and the number of shares. And you have to multiply to get the value of the issue. So we're starting off, they hand it to us, they give us that value. It's 800,000 in this case. And then percent is 7%, and this is the percent of commission. They didn't label this column very well, but this is the percent of underwriting commission. So we want to multiply these two guys together because that's how we get the underwriting commission total. So we're going to multiply, and that's going to give us $56,000. So $56,000. Remember, when you're doing a percentage, do not just multiply by 7. It's 7%, meaning I need to move that decimal 2 times. Or if you hit the percent sign on your calculator, because most calculators have it now, you can do 7 and hit the percent sign. It'll move the percent for you, or not the percent, sorry, the decimal for you. But make sure you're moving that decimal one way or the other, because if you just do 800,000 times 7, you're going to get a huge number. It's not going to make any sense because the commission is going to be worth way, way more than the value of the stocks were to begin with. So we don't really want to have a huge number here. We're multiplying by percentage. We should have a piece of the number. All right, so now we have commission, we have other expenses. These are both expenses of buying the stock. So we're going to add these two together, and that's going to give us our total selling. So that's 83,500. Net proceeds, remember, we can calculate the net proceeds right here. Tells us that we're going to do the value of the issue minus the total selling expenses. So total selling expenses, value of the issue. We have those two columns. Yes, we have to fill this one in, but as long as we filled it in, we can do this. So we're just going to subtract these, this 83,500 from 800,000. So my net proceeds end up being this much, 716,500. And then they give us the number of shares. So they actually do tell us the number of shares. We didn't have to use that up here to do the value of the issue, but we do need that to calculate the cost per share of underwriting expenses. So in order to do cost per share, we're going to take this 83,500, because remember it's total selling expenses, this column here, divided by the number of shares, which they're handing to us. They're giving us the number of shares there. So we're going to divide. And thinking of this logically, 83,000 is much smaller than 500,000. We should not end up with whole numbers here. We should end up with a decimal. This is a small amount. So just think of that kind of logically. That's what we do with math. Math is very logical in this way. If you think of, if it's a small number divided by a large number, I'm going to have a decimal. If it's a larger number divided by a smaller number, then I'm going to have a whole number. I can still have a decimal after it, but I'm going to end up with a whole number in the front instead of 0. So just keep that in mind. You want to definitely be thinking about the logic of your answers when you get things. All right, so that's how we fill out that first table there. Hopefully that was pretty straightforward. I know I got a little wordy there at the end. So number 5, Global Corporation sold 400,000 shares of stock at $27.25 per share. So they're not telling us value of the issue. They told me how many shares, and they told me how much they were per share. So I'm going to need to come up here, and I'm going to need to use this calculation. I already can see that. They gave me those two pieces that they didn't give me before in this table. The investment banker's commission was 6.3% of the value of the stocks. The other expenses were 0.6% of the value of the stocks. So I know once I have my value of my commission, I'm going to need to multiply by my percentage. One thing that you can do 6.3%, and then you can do 0.6% and add those two together. Or you can simply combine these two and go 6.9% for your total. Because you don't necessarily need to list them separately. Unless the problem is asking you to list them separately, you don't really have to. You can do them together, combined. I just did 6.3 plus 0.6, and I have 6.9%. Again, same thing as this percentage over here, what I was telling you about. It's not 6.9, it's 6.9%. That means move your decimal over. This is what you're going to use when you use your calculation here. Definitely important. Make sure you move that decimal over. Or 6.9 in your calculator and then hit the percent button and it will move it. So just keep that in mind when you're doing that. And really, it's pretty straightforward as far as what you're doing here. Same thing that you did in this table. Once you calculate your value, you have to do that on your own on this one. You're going to multiply by your percentage, which I just showed you. You can do the 6.9% instead of the two separate ones. Add any other costs, which in this case, we don't have to add other costs because that's part of the 6.9%. We just combined it. So once we multiply by 6.9%, that is our total selling expenses. And then you want to look at your net proceeds, right? Net proceeds is value of the issue minus your total selling expenses. And cost per share, because that's the last thing they ask you here, cost per share. You need to divide your total selling expenses by the number of shares that were sold, which was 400,000. So again, I know I kind of walked through that one a little bit slower, but we definitely want to make sure we're paying attention to the wording here. So number 6, I want to say, so you own a major sound studio. You have plans for a major expansion to finance the program. You plan to sell 500,000 shares of stock at $40 per share. Complete the table on the next page. So the first bit that we need to pay attention to is the only information they're actually giving us here. We're selling 500,000 shares at $40 per share. So when I go to this next page here, where's my mouse? There's my mouse. It's going over there slowly. So gross proceeds, which is 100% of, you know, us selling these stocks, we need to do this calculation, 500,000 times 40. That will tell us how much gross proceeds we had. That's what we need to put in here. And it's a pretty darn big number. So again, thinking logically, I already have $500,000 and I'm multiplying that by 40. It's going to be a pretty big number. Underwriting commission is 6.3%, 4%, or 0.4%, 0.3%, 0.2%, 0.1% for all of these. And I didn't read all the titles here, but so they want you to take this amount here that you calculate, which make sure you put it in the table. Each one of these you're going to multiply 6.3% times that amount. It's 6.3% of the gross proceeds. Same thing for accounting fees. It's 0.4% of the gross proceeds. So you're going to keep multiplying by that same amount. You're just going to change the percentage here. And you need to fill in each one of these pieces as you go. So you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different expenses. And these are all expenses, so they're all kind of negatives here. You don't get a negative when you multiply, but they're expenses. When you add to get your net proceeds, you kind of look at this straight down, you're going to do gross proceeds minus each one of these pieces. And that's going to tell you what your net proceeds are. Because they don't give you a total expenses column here. For whatever reason, they're not making you total it. So instead, you can just take this gross proceeds and subtract each number. And that'll tell you your net proceeds when you get to the end. All right, let's look at this Algebra 1. So it says, Instant Electronic Sound, LLC is issuing an initial public offering, IPO, initial public offering, to raise net proceeds of $59,905, $95,905,000, said that wrong to begin with, to produce and market their IES pod. Their initial share price is $75 per share. The underwriting commission is 5.6% of the value of the stocks. If the expenses total $275,000, find, so it goes through and asks you to find a bunch of pieces here. It says the number of shares that Instant Electronic Sound must issue, the value of the stock issue, the underwriting commission, the total selling expenses, the selling cost per share. So one thing that helped me when I was going through doing this problem is I literally went through and recreated that table back from 1 through 4. So I literally had, value of commission, and then percent, and then commission. 2 S's in commission. I can spell that. And then other expenses, which I don't believe they give you other expenses in here. Oh, no, they do. Sorry, other expenses. They do give us other expenses. So other expenses. And I'm writing a little bit big here because I'm going to end up running out of room. And we have total selling expenses, net proceeds, number of shares. I literally recreated that table from the first page. Because if I recreate that table, I can go through and I can start filling these pieces in. So the value, my value of issue would be $75 times my number of shares. I don't know the number of shares. That's actually one of the first things it asks me to figure out. I don't know the number of shares, but I do know my percentage. It told me the percentage was 5.6%. So I know that. I also know from the first page, the calculations we're doing, value times percent. So multiplying these two pieces, remember this is one piece, gives me my commission here. So I would have 775x times 5.6%. That's my commission. So I literally just combined these two. Other expenses, that was 27,000, or sorry, keep doing that, making it smaller than it is. 275,000. That was my other expenses. Total selling expenses. So total selling expenses, which if I multiply this piece, So 75 times 5.6. So this is total expenses. And I want to multiply. I don't want to write it like this anymore. I want to multiply. 75 times 5.6%. That gives me 4.2. 4.2x. So I just simplified that. That's all I did. But total selling expenses also means I have to add other expenses. So it's going to be plus 275,000. So I have this secondary equation. I keep kind of moving it forward here in my table. The other pieces of my table would be number of shares and selling cost per share, but those ones aren't terribly important right now. Number of shares would be X because we don't know what it is. That's what I'm using for number of shares. So what I wanted to do is just set this up for you. Value equals, value minus total equals net. And I'm shorthanding that completely. So the value of the issue minus the total selling expenses equals the net proceeds, right? I'm just using the kind of beginning words there. So my value, I wrote as 75 times X minus the total selling expenses, which is this guy here. So minus 4.2 X plus 275,000. And I'm putting this in parentheses because minus, this is actually going to affect both pieces. It's minus the total selling expenses, not just minus 4.2x. It's minus both things. And that's going to equal my net proceeds, which they already told me what they're aiming for net proceeds. We know that. I'm just reading the problem there. So boop, 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 boop. All right. So far, we've got this somewhat complicated looking problem. I'll give you that. This one is a little bit more complicated looking. So we want to start simplifying this. I'm going to move this up just so I can see it. I'm straining to see the bottom of the screen here. And I'm going to give myself a little more room. Erase that. Okay. So we want to simplify this a little bit. It's 75x instead of doing the times x minus 4.2x minus 275. So really, I just took this negative and I just distributed it. I know that sounds funny, but because it's outside the parentheses, each thing gets affected by that negative. So it kind of flipped over those signs. Equals 59,905,000. So I want to add these two pieces together. 75x minus 4.2x. I can combine those because they are like terms. So if, and I said add, but since it's minus, we're actually going to subtract. So 70.8x minus 275,000 gives us our 59,000 again. So I'm just bringing this down. I just keep simplifying a little bit, piece at a time. So all I did, I just added my two like terms together. Or in this case, I keep saying add, but I subtracted because one's positive, one's negative. All right, so now this is kind of getting to that point in the algebra problem where we need to use PEMDAS backwards. So, and I'm just going to write it up here. PEMDAS. So this is usually something that students recognize pretty quickly. PEMDAS is for simplification. It means I'm simplifying my problem. So when I distributed this negative sign, that was my parentheses that I was doing. I don't have any exponents in this one. I didn't have any multiplication or division to simplify. 75 is being multiplied by x, 4.2 is being multiplied by x, but I can't simplify them yet. I don't know what x is. But I can add or subtract to simplify. So when I'm using PEMDAS, I'm literally going from left to right, like I'm reading. Once I simplify as far as I can go, there's nothing more to be added, subtracted, multiplied, divided on the one side of the equation. Then I start working backwards on PEMDAS. Okay, I should not go past multiplication division. If there's still parentheses and exponents, we didn't simplify enough. We need to keep going. With the exception of like x squared, that happens sometimes, not too much in business math, but sometimes we still have an exponent like that. But normally, we shouldn't have any parentheses or exponents left. All right, so what I want to do here is start working backwards. I want to look at what is being added or subtracted on the same side as my variable. I want to undo that. So I'm going to undo the addition here. 275,000 is being added to the X. And be careful with addition and subtraction. I want just the number being added or subtracted. I do not want the 7.8, which is positive, but it's being multiplied. That's not being added. That's being multiplied. So I'm going to add, this 275,000 back over here because this was part of my other expenses. I need to put that back. We need to go back to what X was before all of these things happened to it, before I subtracted my 275,000 other expenses. So now I have 70.8X. These cancel. Anything minus itself cancels. Equals. And when I subtract or add here, I get 60,180,000. I don't know why I keep making the numbers smaller than they are when I start to read them. So to figure out what X is, the last thing I have to do is undo this multiplication. So I need to divide by 70.8. I'm going to divide by 70.8 on both sides here. So you're still going to get a pretty decently big number here, but it's going to definitely be smaller than 60 million at this point because I'm dividing by 70. So X ends up being 850,000. This is how many shares need to be issued. Okay, so we need 850,000. You should not just have $850,000 written on this line. You need to show your work. How did we get here? Make sure you write this out. There is no way to get here without writing something out. So make sure you're writing this out. Now that we have the number of shares, it says the value of the stock issued. We want to know how much each one was. Well, or not how much each one was, but how much total it was. Well, they were $75 each, and we already wrote that right here. We know how to figure this out. 75 times 850,000. This is how many I'm issuing. This is how much they are each. So this will tell me the value. The underwriting commission is the percent, which we already know. It's 5.6% of, meaning times, this value. And I'm just going to write value here. Remember, that's that guy there. I'm going to let you do that calculation. The total selling expense is going to be the commission. So commission that we just found in part C plus the other expenses, which was 275,000. And that will tell me what my total selling expenses are. And then the selling cost per share, I need my total that I just did in part D, and I'm going to divide that by the number that I've issued, which was 850,000. That's how many we decided to issue. That will tell me my cost per share. So definitely a bit of work on this one, but we can do it. I'm going to let you guys finish that off. I hope it helped, and I will see you in section 3.